It was supposed to be just another Tuesday morning committee meeting. You know the kind. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, coffee going cold in paper cups, and everyone checking their phones while pretending to pay attention. The kind of hearing that maybe gets a 30-second mention on the evening news, if anything at all. The kind where representatives shuffle papers and staffers whisper in corners, and absolutely nothing of consequence happens. But this wasn't going to be that kind of morning. The House Committee on Oversight and Reform had convened at 9 a.m. sharp, room 2154 of the Rayburn House office building. The morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the mahogany table where 24 representatives sat in their assigned spots, most looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. The press gallery was half empty. Just a few reporters from political trade publications and one intern from C-SPAN who looked like she was fighting sleep. The subject was healthcare equity in underserved communities. Sounds boring, right? The kind of topic that makes people's eyes glaze over. The kind of issue that gets buried on page 16 of the newspaper, if it makes it into print at all. But sitting at the far end of the committee table was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, and she had this manila envelope in front of her, thick one, the kind that makes you wonder what's inside. She'd been quiet all morning, not in a shy way, but in that way where you can tell someone's got something to say and they're just waiting for the right moment. Her hands were folded, calm as you please, but if you looked close enough, you could see she was ready. There was something in her eyes, not anger, not frustration, but focus. The kind of focus that comes when you've been preparing for months, when you've done your homework, when you know exactly what you're going to say and when you're going to say it. To her right sat Congresswoman Lauren Boebert from Colorado. You probably know the type, loud, loves the cameras, never met a soundbite she didn't like. She'd been dominating the conversation for the past hour, talking about government overreach and wasting taxpayer dollars. Real buzzword stuff. The kind of talk that sounds good in campaign ads but doesn't mean much when you're actually trying to help people. Boebert was in her element that morning. She'd already delivered 3 mini speeches about the dangers of socialist medicine, the importance of personal freedom, and the need to trust the free market. She quoted the Constitution twice, mentioned the Founding Fathers once, and name-dropped 3 different conservative influencers. The woman was a walking, talking GOP playbook, and she knew it. "We can't keep expecting the government to solve every problem," she'd said, leaning back in her chair with that satisfied look politicians get when they think they've just delivered a particularly clever line. Sometimes the best thing Washington can do is get out of the way and let people take care of themselves. A few people in the gallery nodded. One staffer scribbled notes. The C-SPAN intern perked up slightly, probably hoping for a soundbite that might actually make it to air. That's when Crockett finally spoke up. Her voice was steady, no theatrics, just facts. She started talking about maternal mortality rates in Black communities, about hospitals closing in poor neighborhoods, about women having to travel hours just to get basic prenatal care. Real numbers, real places, real problems. "In the last 5 years," she said, consulting a small notebook, "we've lost 89 hospitals in predominantly Black and brown communities across America. That's not just a statistic. That's 89 neighborhoods that no longer have access to emergency care. 89 places where if you have a heart attack or a stroke or go into labor, you might not make it to help in time." She looked around the room. "In Texas alone, we've lost 12 hospitals since 2018. 12. That means there are entire zip codes with no hospital at all." The room was starting to pay attention. You could feel the energy shift. This wasn't just another policy wonk reciting talking points. This was someone who'd done the work, who knew the numbers, who understood what they meant. Crockett continued. "The average distance to a hospital in underserved communities is now 37 miles. In some areas, it's over 60 miles. That's not just an inconvenience. That's a death sentence for someone having a medical emergency." She pulled out another sheet of paper. Maternal mortality rates for Black women are 3 times higher than for white women. 3 times. These aren't just statistics. These are mothers who died in childbirth because they couldn't get to quality care in time. The room was getting quiet now. The kind of quiet that happens when people realize they're hearing something important. Even the reporters had stopped scrolling through their phones, and that's when Boebert made her mistake. She didn't even wait for her to finish, just cut her off mid-sentence, waving her hand like she was shooing away a fly. "Look," she said, leaning into her microphone with that smug grin of hers, "we can't keep throwing money at every sob story that comes along. These people need to take some personal responsibility." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Personal responsibility. Sob story. These people. "I mean," Boebert continued, warming to her theme, "we're not talking about people who can't help themselves. We're talking about people who made choices. They chose where to live. They chose their lifestyle. They knew the risks, and now they want hardworking taxpayers to bail them out." She looked around the room, clearly pleased with herself. Where does it end? Do we build a hospital in every ghetto? Do we hire a doctor for every street corner? At some point, people have to make adult decisions about their lives and take responsibility for the consequences. The room went dead silent. Not the good kind of quiet, the uncomfortable kind. The kind where you can feel the tension building like a storm cloud. The kind where you know someone just said something they're going to regret. But Crockett? She didn't react. Didn't raise her voice, didn't get defensive, didn't launch into a passionate rebuttal. She just reached for that manila envelope. "Personal responsibility," she repeated like she was tasting the words. "That's interesting." She opened the envelope slowly, carefully. Inside were documents, lots of them, all organized with little colored tabs, blue, red, green, yellow. The kind of organization that takes time, that shows preparation, that suggests someone has been thinking about this moment for a while. "I want to talk about personal responsibility too," she said, pulling out the first document. It was thick, maybe 30 pages, bound with a black clip. "Specifically, yours." The camera started moving in closer. You could sense the shift in the room. The reporters were suddenly awake, pens ready, fingers poised over keyboards. This wasn't going to be another boring committee meeting after all. Crockett stood up and walked to the projection screen at the front of the room. No rushing, no dramatic gestures, just a woman with some papers and a story to tell. She placed the first document under the document camera, adjusting it carefully so the text was clearly visible. The screen lit up. COVID-19 Relief and Healthcare Equity Act, 2021, it read in bold letters at the top. And there, in smaller text below, co-sponsor L. Boebert. She let that sit for a second. Let people read it. Let it sink in. Then she pulled out another document, this one tabbed with red. Amendment 184C, she said, reading from the page. Rural and Urban Healthcare Parity Fund. Allocated $4.2 billion over 3 years to support hospitals in underserved communities. She looked up at Boebert, co-sponsor L. Boebert. The room was dead silent now. Even the reporters had stopped typing. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic outside, someone's stomach growling. "And this one," Crockett continued, placing a third document on the projector. It was tabbed with green. Maternal Health Equity Initiative, $750 million annually to address racial disparities in maternal care. She paused, looking directly at Boebert, co-sponsor L. Boebert. Boebert was starting to shift in her seat. The confident smile was fading. You could see her trying to figure out where this was going, what she was building up to. Her staff was whispering urgently among themselves. "Now," Crockett said, walking back to her seat but not sitting down, "let's talk about what happened to these programs you helped create." She pulled out her tablet and connected it to the projector. The screen changed to show a budget document highlighted in yellow. Fiscal year 2023 Budget Resolution, it read. COVID-19 Relief and Healthcare Equity Act, defunded. Rural and Urban Healthcare Parity Fund, eliminated. Maternal Health Equity Initiative, terminated. And there at the bottom, in black and white, motion to defund, L. Boebert, ranking member, Subcommittee on Health. The silence in that room was deafening. You could hear the air conditioning humming, someone's stomach growling, the scratch of a pen on paper. But nobody was talking. Nobody was even breathing hard. Crockett wasn't done. She pulled out another document, this one much thicker than the others. I have here, she said, correspondence from hospitals in Colorado, hospitals in your district, Congresswoman Boebert. She started reading from the first letter. Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital, Denver. Dear Congresswoman Boebert, we are writing to inform you that due to the elimination of federal funding through the Healthcare Parity Fund, we will be forced to close our community health center effective January 1st, 2024. This decision was not made lightly, but we simply cannot afford to maintain services for low-income patients without federal support. She looked up from the letter. Denver is in your district, isn't it, Congresswoman? Boebert nodded stiffly. She was starting to look uncomfortable, shifting in her seat, glancing at her staff. Crockett continued reading. This closure will affect over 15,000 patients, primarily women of color and their families, who rely on our services for prenatal care, family planning, and emergency treatment. We are deeply concerned about the health implications of this change, particularly for high-risk pregnancies and preventable conditions. She put down the first letter and picked up another. Valley View Hospital, Glenwood Springs. Dear Congresswoman Boebert, it is with great sadness that we inform you of our decision to eliminate our obstetrics program permanently on February 1st, 2024. The defunding of maternal health programs has left us unable to maintain adequate staffing. We will be laying off 28 employees and closing the only birthing center within 85 miles. Document after document, hospital after hospital, all in Boebert's district, all closing because of the very budget cuts she'd proposed, cutting the very program she'd once supported. But Crockett wasn't done. She pulled out her tablet again and pressed play on a video. The screen filled with the image of a young black woman, maybe mid-20s, sitting in what looked like a hospital room. She was holding a newborn baby, maybe a few days old. The lighting was harsh, institutional. You could hear the beeping of medical equipment in the background. My name is Keisha Washington, the woman said, looking directly into the camera. I live in Aurora, Colorado. This is my son, Marcus. He was born 2 weeks ago. Keisha shifted the baby in her arms, adjusting the blanket. When I went into labor with Marcus, I had to take 3 buses to get to a hospital that would accept my insurance. The clinic in my neighborhood had closed down last month. I was in labor for 6 hours on public transportation, trying to get to help. Her voice was steady, but you could hear the emotion underneath. I almost had Marcus on the bus. The contractions were coming every 2 minutes, and I was scared I wouldn't make it. Other passengers were calling 911, but the ambulance couldn't find us because we were moving. The woman's voice broke a little. The bus driver pulled over and helped me breathe through the contractions. A nurse who was riding the bus stayed with me until the paramedics arrived. Marcus was born right there at the bus stop, with strangers holding umbrellas over us because it was raining. She looked down at her baby, then back at the camera. We were lucky. Marcus was healthy, no complications. But I keep thinking, what if there had been problems? What if he'd been in distress? What if I'd hemorrhaged? What if the cord had been wrapped around his neck? The nearest hospital was still 20 minutes away. Keisha's voice got stronger. I voted for Congresswoman Boebert in 2020. I believed her when she said she'd fight for working families. I believed her when she said she understood what it was like to struggle. I believed her when she said she'd make sure we had access to health care. She held up a piece of paper, a campaign mailer with Boebert's picture on it. I want to know what happened to that promise. I want to know why the woman I voted for decided that my son's life wasn't worth the cost of keeping our neighborhood clinic open. The video ended, the screen went black, and the silence in that room was unlike anything you'd ever heard. It wasn't empty silence. It was full of truth, full of consequences, full of a promise broken. Crockett walked back to her seat. She didn't look angry. She looked sad, disappointed, like a teacher who'd caught a student cheating and couldn't understand why. "Congresswoman Boebert," she said quietly, "you helped create these programs. You put your name on them. You campaigned on them. You stood in front of voters across Colorado and promised them that you would fight for accessible health care, and then you killed them. Can you explain that to Keisha Washington? Can you explain that to the people of Aurora?" All eyes turned to Boebert, the woman who'd been so full of words just minutes before, the woman who always had something to say, always had someone to blame, always had an excuse ready. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. She started, then stopped. "The fiscal situation has changed. We had to make hard choices. The spending was out of control." "The spending," Crockett repeated. She pulled out another document. "Let's talk about spending. This is the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2023. You voted for it. It included $2.8 trillion in subsidies for oil and gas companies over 10 years. The same year, you proposed eliminating healthcare programs to save $5.4 billion. She looked at her steadily. "So you could afford to give subsidies to oil companies making record profits, but you couldn't afford to keep Keisha Washington's clinic open?" Boebert was starting to look desperate. "Those are separate issues. You can't just—" "Are they?" Crockett interrupted. "Are they really separate? Because it seems to me like you made a choice. You chose to prioritize corporate welfare over health care for working families. That's a choice, Congresswoman. That's your choice." She pulled out one more document. "This is an email from your office to the House Budget Committee," she said, dated April 3rd of this year. It says, and I quote, "Urban healthcare programs are politically popular but fiscally irresponsible. Recommend elimination to free up funds for energy sector incentives. Minimal political risk, as inner-city voters typically vote Democrat anyway." She looked at Boebert. "Minimal political risk. That's what you called Keisha Washington's life. That's what you called the health and safety of your own constituents. Minimal political risk." The room erupted, not in applause or argument, but in that kind of shocked murmur you hear when something truly unexpected happens, when the mask finally comes off. When someone's private thoughts become public knowledge. Reporters were scribbling frantically. Cameras were zooming in on Boebert's face. Staff members were whispering urgently into phones, but Crockett raised her hand, and somehow, everybody went quiet again. She had that kind of presence. "I didn't bring these documents here to embarrass anyone," she said. "I brought them here because we need to remember something. Every vote we cast, every program we cut, every dollar we redirect, it has a name. It has a face. It has consequences." She started packing up her documents, organizing them back into the manila envelope. "Keisha Washington has a name. The people of Aurora have names. The families who will lose their local health care have names. And they trusted you with their lives." She closed the envelope and looked around the room. "We sit in these marble halls, in these comfortable chairs, and we make decisions about people's lives. We cut programs and eliminate funding and reduce benefits, and we tell ourselves it's about fiscal responsibility. We tell ourselves it's about efficiency. We tell ourselves it's about making hard choices." Crockett stood up. "But let's be honest about what we're really doing. We're choosing who matters and who doesn't. We're choosing who deserves help and who doesn't. We're choosing who gets to live and who gets to die." She picked up her envelope. "The question isn't whether we can afford to fund these programs. The question is whether we can afford not to. And the answer to that question is riding a bus in labor in Aurora, Colorado, wondering why the person she voted for decided her life was a minimal political risk." Crockett walked toward the door. She didn't wait for a response. She didn't need one. The documents had said everything that needed to be said. As she reached the door, something unexpected happened. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York, a Democrat, stood up. Then Representative Ilhan Omar from Minnesota. Then Representative Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts. One by one, people in the room started standing up, not in celebration, but in recognition. Recognition that they'd just witnessed something rare in politics. Someone telling the truth, with receipts to back it up. Even some of the Republicans stood. Representative Dan Crenshaw from Texas, who'd been quiet all morning. Representative Nancy Mace from South Carolina, who'd been taking notes. They didn't applaud, didn't cheer, didn't make a show of it. They just stood in silence, acknowledging what had just happened. Boebert sat in her chair, alone. The bravado was gone. The talking points were useless. The woman who'd built her career on blaming others for problems she'd helped create was finally face to face with her own signature on the documents that had caused so much pain. Her chief of staff leaned over and whispered something in her ear. Boebert shook her head. Whatever damage control they were planning, it was too late. The truth was out there now, on record, on camera, in black and white. Outside the hearing room, the hallway was packed with reporters. They surrounded Crockett with cameras and microphones, all asking the same questions. How does it feel to expose Congresswoman Boebert? Are you planning to run against her? What's your next move? Do you think she should resign? But Crockett just kept walking. She didn't stop for interviews. She didn't pose for photos. She didn't tweet about her moment of triumph. She just walked down the hallway, past the marble columns and the oil paintings of dead representatives, past the tourists taking selfies and the lobbyists in expensive suits. Because for her, this wasn't about politics. It wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about getting her face on the evening news or trending on social media. It was about Keisha Washington and her baby born at a bus stop. It was about the people of Aurora who trusted someone with their lives and been betrayed. Back in the hearing room, the other representatives were packing up their papers and whispering among themselves. The C-SPAN cameras were still rolling, capturing the aftermath. A few reporters were interviewing other committee members, trying to get reactions, trying to understand what had just happened. Representative Ocasio-Cortez walked over to where Boebert was still sitting. She didn't say anything, just looked at her for a moment. Then she shook her head and walked away. Representative Crenshaw was talking to a reporter from Politico. "I've been in Congress for 6 years," he was saying. "I've seen a lot of hearings, a lot of testimony, but I've never seen anything like that. She didn't just make an argument. She made a case. She didn't just give a speech. She presented evidence. That's what we're supposed to be doing here." The reporter was scribbling notes. "Do you think Congresswoman Boebert will face consequences for this?" Crenshaw shrugged. "That's up to the voters of Colorado. But I'll tell you this. If I were her, I'd be updating my resume." Later that afternoon, the clips started appearing online. Not just the confrontation, but the whole thing. The methodical presentation of evidence. The email about minimal political risk. Keisha Washington talking about having her baby at a bus stop. The look on Boebert's face when she realized she'd been caught. By evening, it was everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. The video of Keisha Washington was being shared thousands of times. Hashtag minimal political risk was trending. People were posting their own stories about healthcare access, about closed clinics, about buses to distant hospitals. But it wasn't just social media. The evening news led with the story. Cable news channels were running the footage on loop. Newspaper websites were posting full transcripts. This wasn't just a political moment. It was a cultural moment. And in newsrooms across the country, reporters were making phone calls to hospitals in Colorado, to patients who had been affected by the closures, to other members of Congress who'd supported the programs and then voted to eliminate them. The story was just beginning. That night, in her apartment in Washington, Crockett sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and a stack of letters. Letters from people across the country who'd been affected by healthcare cuts. Letters from nurses who'd lost their jobs. Letters from doctors who'd had to leave underserved communities. Letters from families who'd lost loved ones because care was too far away. She'd been reading these letters for months, collecting them, organizing them. Each one was a story. Each one was a person. Each one was a reason to keep fighting. Her phone was buzzing constantly. interview requests, speaking invitations, meeting requests. Everyone wanted to talk to the woman who'd taken down Lauren Boebert. Everyone wanted to know what her next move was. But Crockett wasn't thinking about her next move. She was thinking about Keisha Washington, about the baby born at a bus stop, about the strangers who'd helped with umbrellas in the rain, about the paramedics who'd arrived just in time. She was thinking about all the babies who might be born in public places in the future, all the families who might not be as lucky as Keisha Washington, all the people who were counting on Congress to remember that they existed. And she was thinking about the manila envelope that was still sitting on her kitchen counter, the one with the documents that had changed everything, the one that had shown the world what really happened when politicians made hard choices behind closed doors. Back in Colorado, Keisha Washington was watching the news coverage with her mother. Marcus was sleeping in her arms, wrapped in a blue blanket. The baby was healthy, beautiful, perfect. But Keisha couldn't stop thinking about what might have been. "Do you think anything will change?" her mother asked. Keisha looked down at Marcus, then back at the TV. "I don't know," she said, "but at least people know now. At least someone was listening." On the screen, they were showing the footage of Crockett presenting her evidence, the calm, methodical way she'd laid out the facts, the way she'd let the documents speak for themselves, the way she'd made it impossible for anyone to look away. "She didn't have to do that," Keisha said. "She didn't have to stick her neck out for people like us." Her mother nodded. "But she did." "Yeah," Keisha said, adjusting Marcus's blanket. "She did." And in that moment, in a small apartment in Aurora, Colorado, hope felt possible again. Not because a politician had made a promise. Keisha had learned not to trust those, but because someone had told the truth. Someone had shown the receipts. Someone had made it clear that the people of underserved communities weren't just statistics to be manipulated or problems to be solved. They were human beings, with names, with faces, with stories that mattered. And sometimes, that's all you need to change the world, not a grand gesture or a passionate speech, just someone willing to open a manila envelope and show people what's inside. The next morning, Boebert's office released a statement. It was the usual political non-apology, full of phrases like "taken out of context" and "mischaracterized my position." It talked about the need for fiscal responsibility and difficult decisions. It blamed the media for sensationalizing the issue, but nobody was buying it because they'd seen the documents. They'd heard the email. They'd watched Keisha Washington tell her story. They'd seen the truth, and no amount of spin could change that. Within a week, 3 more clinics in Colorado announced they were closing. The local newspapers ran the stories on their front pages with headlines like "Another Clinic Falls" and "Healthcare Desert Expands." Each story mentioned Crockett's presentation, Boebert's role in the closures, and the minimal political risk email. Boebert's approval ratings plummeted. Her campaign contributions dried up. Her staff started looking for other jobs. The woman who'd thought she was untouchable was suddenly radioactive. But Crockett wasn't celebrating. She was in her office, working on her next presentation. Because the manila envelope had been just the beginning. There were more documents, more stories, more politicians who needed to be held accountable. And there were more people like Keisha Washington waiting for someone to tell their story. Waiting for someone to show that their lives mattered. Waiting for someone to prove that democracy could still work, even when everything seemed broken. Some people come into the room ready for a fight. They bring sound bites and rehearsed outrage. They raise their voices, hoping the volume alone will win the argument. And sometimes, for a moment, it works. But Jasmine Crockett didn't walk into that hearing to fight fire with fire. She walked in with documentation. She walked in with evidence. She walked in with the names of the people who'd been hurt. She walked in with the receipts. Because when someone tries to dismiss your cause as just another sob story, you don't always need to argue back. You don't need to defend yourself. You just need to show them the signature at the bottom of the page and ask them to explain it. That day wasn't about proving who was smarter or more articulate. It was about what had been taken away, not from politicians, but from people, from families who trusted their elected officials to keep their promises, from communities that believed their representatives would fight for them. And someone had decided those promises weren't worth keeping as long as nobody asked too many questions. But Crockett did ask, not with noise or spectacle. She asked with evidence, with a video of a woman who deserved better, with an email that was never meant to see daylight, with documents that couldn't be spun or explained away. And in doing so, she reminded the country of something we keep forgetting, that every budget line has a human cost. Every cut has a consequence. Every minimal political risk has a name and a face and a story. And sometimes, justice doesn't come with a microphone or a Twitter hashtag. Sometimes it walks in quietly, wearing a blue suit, carrying a manila envelope. Sometimes, justice is a young mother with a baby and a story nobody wanted to hear until now. Sometimes, justice is a room full of powerful people left speechless because the truth finally made it onto the record. That's what Jasmine Crockett did. She didn't just win a moment. She didn't just silence a critic. She reframed the entire conversation so that nobody could pretend they didn't see the human cost anymore. She didn't come to debate. She came to remind us that there's no such thing as a neutral budget. Every dollar we cut is a service we eliminate. Every program we kill is a person we abandon. And in a world where so many people are already told they don't matter, she asked the most dangerous question of all. Who did we leave behind? And why did nobody notice? The answer was in the manila envelope all along.